as I get started, I'll just remind everyone to please hold questions to the end. If you're here in person in the audience, hold questions to the end. If you're on Zoom, enter your questions in the chat. You can do that whenever they come up, and we will read them off at the end of the meeting. That our speaker answer them. Also, the usual reminder: mute your cell phones if you're here in person, and if you're on Zoom, please make sure your microphone stays muted. Check to make sure my phone's muted. We are coming down to the end of the club's kind of active year. We go a little bit of summer hiatus, but we do have the club picnic next month. We are hoping, we're trying to work out details with our special guest. Going to come and put on a show, but the details aren't entirely nailed down yet. So I won't talk too much about that. But it should be a fun picnic, even if it's just the usual picnic and bird walk. So and then can
you mention the date since it's different?
This is true. We're not doing it on the second Tuesday like we do our usual monthly meetings. It is, I believe, June 3rd. Is that the?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it will be on June 3rd. And as Carmen conceived, a bird walk around 5 p.m. and then all of us eating our picnics after that. But there'll be an email with an update once we have all the details firmly kind of sealed in place. So watch your email for updates on that, as well as sometime after the email comes out about the electing the new board for next year. So, and sometime further in the future, I'll send out an email when the dates get settled for next year's monthly meetings, and I start slotting speakers in. I've got lots of great speaker candidates waiting for to figure out which dates they can come in and talk to us on. So, as for tonight, I mentioned in email a prolific author. She mentioned earlier tonight she's published 97 books, which my wife is astonished. It's more than one book a year, and given that she didn't start publishing at the age of 1, the actual book per year rate is probably a bit higher than that. But those of us who are here in person, she's got a great selection of stuff out there. Some of the books are on birds. Many of them are on death in the national parks. So, and a number of them are on hiking. But definitely some fun reading material. And she's here to talk to us tonight for her most recent book, The Complete Language of Birds, which runs through individual species of birds and how those birds fit into like the culture and mythology of different civilizations around the world. So, and you're here to hear her talk and not me, so why don't I go ahead and let her take over. Randi Minetor.
Thanks so much, Josh, and I appreciate you making me sound like I'm important. So, I think for the most part, I think he's already covered it. So I'm not going to give you a lot of intro after that. I will tell you that The Complete Language of Birds is an encyclopedia about 400 different bird species around the world and their folklore and mythology and so on. So I got this assignment in June 2023. An editor from a different culture called me up and said they just had this book was already scheduled and ready to go and would be going into production in 6 months, but their author pulled out because it was too hard. So, and which is good and bad in a lot of ways, but so I researched and wrote this book in 6 months. It was all I did for 6 months. So it was fascinating. The research was terrific. So it kept me going. And my husband, Dave Irving, also helps. That's my husband, Nick, over there. It was all illustrations from the early 20th century. So unfortunately, unfortunately not Nick's work, but some very, very pretty things in there. So, ooh, nice. So, let's get started. In the beginning, in fact, an universe. Egyptians called it Gengenware, or the gray honker. And this goose carried and protected egg that when hatched would produce all life on earth. But this goose did not lay the egg. Another being did that. That was Jeb, also known by the nickname Gray Cackler. Whether or not Jeb was actually a goose at the time of the centuries, he often wore an Egyptian goose or another bird as part of his headdress. This picture that I found here, what do you think? Lesser black-backed gull he's got at this point? Now, Egypt's creation story has another character, Amun, Lord of the Thrones, who also liked to take the form of a 1,000-year-old petroglyph. In fact, the legend says that Amun's goose cry of victory over his adversaries became the very first sound heard by the people of Earth. And to commemorate this, Amun is known as the Great Shrieker. So, Jeb laid a golden egg that contained the sun. Gengenware incubated and hatched the egg, whose presence scared off all of the early adversaries. And the result was, well, let there be light. Who knew that a goose could be so powerful? So meanwhile, down at the southern tip of Africa, a whole other creation was going on. The invader, a god called Swigo, who ignited a great fire to bring all of the traits of the animals out of the ether and into reality. So he gathered them all, and baked them into all animal shapes. And this, a Cory buster, this very large bird with broad wings, served as his helper. So the Cory bustard fanned the flames continuously with its wings, keeping the fire burning until all of the animals were fully baked. Okay. Sorry, that's okay. How do I do that? How do I? Sure. All right, so let me get back into, right now I have to get back into, yeah, there it is. There we go. That do it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, and in a wonderful, Aboriginal legend from Australia, all life begins in the dark, skulking its way around the earth as best it could. And the spirits of the sky spent part of an eternity deciding how they would bring light into the world. And so they built this huge pile of sticks that they planned to ignite, but they didn't want to frighten all of the beings on the ground by suddenly producing some huge burst of light and scaring them to death. So one day, an emu named Dinawan and a Rolga named Brala sat side by side on their nests, protecting their eggs in the dark. And as they talked about the children they would bring into the world soon, they began to argue clever, like any two pregnant women on a cul-de-sac, talking about the kids they're about to have. Well, the discussion became more and more heated, and finally, Brala grabbed one of Dinawan's eggs in its bill and heaved it up into the sky. So high did it go that it collided with the huge pile of sticks that the gods had put together, and the egg broke open, the yolk spilled a huge bonfire. The sky lit up and bathed the earth in light and showed everyone just how beautiful the earth was. And from that day forward, the spirits decided that they would build a fire every morning. They still worried that the transition to light every day would frighten the animals. So they searched for one fire to let them know that the light was on its way soon. Now, okay, well, for those who have been to Australia, it's the laughing kookaburra, who was only too happy to volunteer to play this important role. And to this day, this devoted bird wakes up the entire continent every morning by calling just before sunrise. Now, and pivots in the early days of the Earth. And one of the big surprises for me when I did my research for this book is that just about every culture has a story of the Great Flood. We all know, of course, Noah's story and the ark, and that as the water began to recede, a raven and then a dove to see who would find land, see if either of them would find land. The raven never came back. So we figure it probably came up with some nice waterlogged carrion to munch on and forgot all about Noah. But the dove felt more of a duty to Noah for saving his life, so it brought back the olive branch. And this meant that the land had begun to emerge from the water. Well, other cultures tell the story a little differently. In some areas of the United States, Christians associate the painted bunting with the rainbow that God sent to Noah as a sign of his covenant with the earth. Painted buntings, of course, are the living embodiment of the rainbow. So they were. Now, in the Birachek area of Turkey, people believe that Noah released a northern bald ibis, of all things, a bird they see as a symbol of fertility, to guide the repopulation of the earth. And the Athabascans of Alaska believe that the Great Flood came to an end with the help of the American bittern. The bittern swallowed enormous amounts of water, flew to it to form the braided rivers that we see all over Alaska. Now, an Ojibwa legend tells us that long ago, the Creator sent a great flood to purify the world and drown everything evil, just like we know. And one man, this guy, Wayne Abuju, worked quickly and he built himself a raft. And he managed an entire month as they waited for the water to recede. But the water didn't go down. So he summoned several different birds to dive to the bottom and retrieve some dirt from the old world, which he could then use to start a new continent. Well, the loon was a logical bird for this, but he tried and he failed. So the dove volunteered, but as you can probably imagine, that didn't go so well. The poor thing nearly drowned. So finally, a lone coot knew they didn't think he could do it. Time passed, and then suddenly the birds noticed he was gone, and they started to search for him. So they found him floating behind the raft, unconscious, but still breathing. And sure enough, when they started to resuscitate him, they found a little bit of mud from the bottom of the floodwater stuck in his bill. The coot had saved them, and Wayne Abuju could restart the continent. Now, it's worth noting that many other Native American legends of the Great Flood tell a very similar story, but with different waterfowl as the hero. In the Mountain culture, for example, it's a merganser who brings up the morsel of earth using its strong feet to push off and give itself a really good start off the raft, and then that long, thin red bill to dig up what it got on the bottom. According to Maori legend from Lightning and Thunder, caused the flood when he created the crystal floor of heaven. The crystal floor caused all the water in the sky to fall in one place called Fjordland, where the Fjordland penguin lives. This area receives some of the most torrential rain in New Zealand, and the poor Fiordland penguin gets blamed for that because he helped out Tawaki when they were. weeks, the winds grow calm, so kingfishers can nest on the beach and bring a brood into the world. And we call these the halcyon days, a period of calm and happiness. And Alcyone remains part of the taxonomic name for several of the world's kingfishers. Now, have you ever wondered how the goldfinch got its beautiful yellow color? Well, the Iroquois people did, the Indians, or Native Americans up in my neck of the woods, and the story's been passed down for generations. It seems that a fox chased a raccoon to make the little bandit its dinner. The raccoon ran up a tree, so the hungry fox waited all day by the bottom. But of course, the raccoon didn't come down, so the fox dozed off. And when he woke up, he found that the raccoon was gone, but the raccoon, before it went, painted his eyes shut with tree resin, which had hardened so that he could not open his eyes. He was essentially blind. So the fox called and called and called for help, and some drab little finches in the neighborhood took pity on this little fox, and they flew in and pecked off the resin. So the fox thanked them for their good deed by using some yellow flowers nearby to color their plumage bright yellow, the color of sunshine. And the goldfinches wear this plumage all spring to this very day. I picked out maybe Canada goldenrod, which is a native plant around the place where this whole thing may have happened. It's pretty close to the color of the goldfinch. Now, the story of the trapped fox and the helpful bird is one of the tales that shows up in the folklore of many different cultures, where it may be used to explain a hummingbird's iridescence or the bright red color of a northern cardinal. So we can imagine people of many different tribes coming together in places like this. This is Aztec Ruins National Monument in actually New Mexico, or in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, or one of those meeting places that are still preserved by the National Park Service down there. Then they would trade goods, and then at night they would gather in kivas and tell each other stories from their cultures. One tribe might have an explanation for a specific thing that another tribe hadn't really worked out yet. So one tribe's story might become part of the mythology of another one, and that's one of the ways that these stories got passed around. So you hear some of the same things up in the Northeast that you hear down in the Southwest. Now let's turn now to some of the bravest and the most superstitious people on the planet, the people who ply their trade at sea. Entire books have been written about the omens and portents brought on by pelagic birds over boats filled with sailors or fishermen or explorers. Seafarers especially revered the albatross. Any of the 22 species of these magnificent birds, including this Laysan albatross that we were lucky enough to photograph in Hawaii last year. For centuries, having an albatross around your neck has been synonymous with carrying a weighty burden that we can't wait to dispose of as soon as we can. Well, this expression, of course, comes from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which I will not burden you with reciting for you today. But in it, we learn that killing an albatross is the worst luck of all bad luck, inviting shipwreck and certain death. So how do we counteract this bad omen? The person who killed the bird has to wear it on a rope around their neck, literally carrying the burden of their misdeed. Now, an albatross can weigh as much as 18 pounds, so this was nothing to take lightly. Albatross lore on the high seas can govern the lives of sailors with endless speculation on whether an albatross following a ship is a good omen with a promise of the bird's protection, or a bad omen of an oncoming storm with the bird hiding behind the ship and all of its equipment and all of its features, and in the old days, all of its sails, so that it would not get the brunt of the storm. Whichever it turns out to be, there's another twist. The albatross most likely carries the soul of someone lost at sea. So whether it's good news or bad news, it's probably meant with the best of intentions. Now, Coleridge's poem dominates seabird lore, so it may seem that albatrosses are the only birds that affect a sailor's fortune. But the family of northern storm petrels, also carry considerable weight with seafarers. The storm part of the name comes from their habit of taking refuge from an oncoming gale by flying behind a ship, letting the structure block out the weather. Now, sailors took this as a dependable warning that a storm was on its way, but some thought that the birds actually brought the storm with them, making a flock of storm petrels at a ship's stern a very worrisome sight. In fact, some seafarers went so far as to call it good luck if a storm petrel happened to defecate on them as it passed over them. This is a good time to remind you of the #1 rule of birding: never look up with your mouth open. So killing a storm petrel, even in retaliation for the defecation, was and is still considered bad luck, and as if the shooter wishes to invite bad weather for a very long stay. So if you want to find yourself caught at sea in the middle of a hurricane, shoot down a storm petrel. Now, as long as we're on the subject of disgusting things people do at sea, fishermen of old observed gray herons, the great blue heron of Europe, essentially, standing patiently, waiting for fish to swim by at just the right distance, and decided that something about the heron's feet must attract the fish. So they coated their fishing lines with a noxious goo they made out of heron fat and feet. As this practice has faded, we can assume it wasn't very effective and maybe also intolerably disgusting. I also learned some fairly dark things about birds' lives, and I made a point of including these in my book because readers need to know that not everybody who approaches birds has unselfish ends. The parrots of the Caribbean islands, for example, have been poached nearly to death by the black market on pet birds. Some of the islands have moved to name these birds as their national symbols, which has released funds and organized efforts to save them. But on some of these islands, it's virtually impossible to actually see these parrots anymore unless you can get special dispensation to go into very specific wildlife refuges. And then we have the fate of the ortolan, a tiny bird that has had the bad luck of becoming a delicacy in parts of Europe. You may have seen an episode of Succession, or for that matter, American Dad, in which ortolan is actually eaten. The recipe is gruesome. They fatten the bird up in a cage for more than 3 weeks, and then they kill it by drowning it in Armagnac brandy. The chef then cooks it. At that point, I assume he's deep frying it, and serves it whole. And the gourmands who eat the ortolan pop it down in one bite, but first they throw a napkin over their faces so you can't see them doing it. Maybe because they know how shameful it is, but also because it's kind of gross to watch somebody eat a whole bird. Only the beak remains on the plate when they're finished. I'm glad to report that the European Union has banned this practice, but that doesn't mean you can't still get ortolan for dinner if you really want it. Finally, let's talk about birds that don't exist. As we've seen long before we began to understand birds in scientific terms, miraculous flying creatures were part of nearly every culture's mythology. But sometimes the powers of actual living birds just don't rise to the level that the gods and storytellers required. So birds need to do something more, meld with the body of a god or goddess, or become the lead character in a myth so vivid that it needs a supernatural species to tell it. So, in Egypt, the god Tot takes on the mantle of a bird, specifically an African sacred ibis, while he controls the passage of time and the change of seasons. Tot is the god of the moon, wisdom, writing, hieroglyphics, science, magic, art. He's a busy dude. So the ibis head allows him to change the pace of the passage of time, so he has time to get all of his tasks done. Now, on the flip side of this benevolence, a mythical bird called an uzlam provides an excuse for foolishness, shifting the blame for mistakes away from humans and onto a bird way too silly to behave itself. In British and Australian legend, Uzlum flies in a spiral of circles tighter and tighter until it eventually flies up its own butt. I'm guessing everyone here knows an Uzlum of some form. And here's the Fen Huang, or Chinese phoenix, one of China's 12 ornaments, or ancient symbols that denote the power and authority of the person who's wearing them. The ornaments date back at least to 2294 BC, and actually maybe much longer. They're embroidered on the clothing of high-ranking people in Chinese society. The description of this beast has changed over the millennia, so this one more or less follows the recent depictions: a golden pheasant's head, a mandarin duck's body, a peacock's tail, a crane's legs, and a parrot's bill. And wherever the Fen Huang appears, it implies the virtue and honesty of the people it adorns, so it often appears at weddings as a blessing of fidelity and harmony, and some households bring it out to display in good times and put it away in bad times. Now, exactly how and where we acquired the legend of the phoenix has been a subject of debate for thousands of years. It appears long before Greek mythology cemented this story of an immortal bird who got tired of its cushy life in paradise. Phoenix traveled to the mortal world where things lived and died, but the phoenix always knew it would remain immortal. Well, one night, Phoenix built a nest of twigs, and as he waited for Apollo, the sun god, to arrive, he began to sing. Well, morning came, and Apollo passed over his golden chariot, but the sun god so admired the phoenix's song that he stopped to listen. As he enjoyed the song, his nest of twigs, and it ignited, and Phoenix burst into flames, dissolving into ashes. Well, all was not lost for Phoenix. 3 days later, the magical bird sprang up from the ashes, young and renewed, and the bird realized he could do this again and again, but only once every 1,000 years. So he continues to repeat this cycle of death and rebirth as he will for eternity. So that's the complete language of birds, with stories about nearly 400 species of birds around the world. I mentioned it's illustrated rather than photographic, and you've seen some of the illustrations here that are in the book. This was an utterly delightful book to write and to research, combining my love of birds and natural science and history, and I hope it's as much fun for you as it was for me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to tell you about it today, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
All right, then. I'll bring the microphone around. For anyone who has a question here, raise your hand. I'll bring you the mic. I want to start things off just asking about your, I guess your writing method. When the other author kind of gave up this project and it was turned over to you, how did you go about kind of gathering the information on all the myths and legends of all these bird species and put it together?
I got. Luckily, the one thing that the author had done was put together a list of 400 birds she suggested. So I started with that, which was a pretty good foundation. I changed about a quarter of that, as, going through it, because some of them, there just weren't good stories about them. But the internet is a miraculous thing, but I don't just take information off the internet because God only knows, right? So I looked for the source material that those ideas had come from, and worked my way down into various cultures. There a lot of these stories have been captured in books or monographs or other kinds of manuscripts at this point, and some had not. Finding stories about parrots in the Caribbean turned out to be nearly impossible until I hit a librarian who sent me something that was handwritten. In the Caribbean, they're still passing these stories down orally. So she got somebody to write it for me, apparently, and sent it to me. That was very nice. And let's hear it for librarians, right? We love librarians. Because they know things. So yeah, it got so that if I couldn't find anything interesting about a bird, I replaced it with something that did have a story. So yeah, it was quite the process. I had this huge spreadsheet. Yeah, it was something.
Excellent. I had never heard the one about the painted bunting and it's the relation to the rainbow after the flood.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
What part of the country is that? I mean, the bunting I know is the southeast, but
yeah, well, where the bunting is essentially. So Florida to Texas, that general area. I think it's probably in addition to being Christian, there's probably some Gullah Geechee in there too from the South Carolina, Georgia area. Some other ways of practicing Christianity and relating it more to symbols like that. So, in that general area.
yeah, interesting. My wife's from South Carolina, so
Oh,
we
really?
spent some time along the coast on like Defusky Island in that area.
Uh-huh.
I'm blanking on the name of the kind of African American culture, like sort of freed slave culture down there that populated a lot of those islands.
Oh,
Huh?
Gullah.
That's it. That's the one.
Yeah,
That's the word I was trying to come up with.
Yeah, you do run into some of those stories. Some overlap between that and Christian, based on the people who have been assimilated into one culture or the other.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm not used to hearing about any sort of about Christianity incorporating things of the native kind of land they moved into as part of their mythology. So.
Yeah, there
But
were
it
a
makes
couple
sense
things, like the Anhinga being, people, a lot of this may not be showing up in their churches, but there are certainly things that they believe. The way, even people up here now, I've had people tell me that there are cardinals in their backyard, so that must be their deceased relative coming to visit them. You hear of that one a lot, but that one has kind of come up from that area.
Well, doing dragonflies, I hear that about dragonflies too. So.
Oh, I bet that's true.
People like deceased relatives and flying animals and things.
Got a question for you.
Oh.
Yeah, I believe the ortolan buntings were put in the fire, into the flames of the fire and burned, so all the feathers turned to ash, and then they swallowed them whole.
Thank you. That's good to know. I couldn't imagine what are they doing with this poor bird now. So.
I'll try to talk through my mask. First of all, I thought it was very educational and entertaining. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Secondly, I feel a little bit compelled to defend Aristotle.
By all means.
When I read some of his zoology a couple of years ago, I remember a passage where he describes that birds bend their knees backwards as opposed to forwards like we do. And I thought that might have been the first time that was registered in the literature.
That may well be. Yeah, that's interesting that he actually was the first to make that observation. Yeah.
I just verified on my cell phone that there's a middle school in Holyoke that got torn down and new one's being built in its place. And the mascot of that school, even before the school was torn down, Peck School is Phoenix.
Oh. That, boy, and very, very symbolic now, certainly with them rebuilding it. Yeah, that is marvelous.
All right, we have Any questions in the Zoom chat?
Nothing in the chat tonight. No,
All
quiet in the
quiet there,
chat.
so. All right, unless anyone else wants to throw something in, we have, for those of us here in person, we have the great table full of books to look at that are for sale. The author here to sign them if you like signed copies. So, and why don't we thank our guest, Randi Minetor, once again. And thanks to those of you who came out, and hopefully we'll see everybody at the picnic next month. And don't forget to vote for your new board members.